Every now and then I like to check up on our old friend VenomFangX, see what he's up to. He has a really annoying title sequence now, which reminds me of like those obnoxious made-for-children television programs, usually with host children who are about, 12, 13 years old, making a show for younger kids. Something like that. It's quite irritating, actually. It goes on for like 30 seconds, too. No YouTube video entry should go on for, more than about 10 seconds, in my opinion. Anyway, one of the reasons that his videos amuses me is because he's moved from, obviously, parroting Kent Hovind to parroting people like William Lane Craig. I really do not know where YouTube a Christian apology and evangelism would be without the arguments of people like William Lane Craig and, to a lesser extent, Alvin Plantinga. But Christian apologists love to regurgitate Dr. Craig's arguments. And but in one of his newest videos, what was it called? A World of Belief. He attempts to make his own argument, or at least he presents it as his own argument. I hope it is, for the sake of somebody like Dr. Craig, who at least has some actual training in philosophy, because he gives two premises, and then there's one sort of implied premise that he doesn't list, and then a conclusion where he says, basically, belief is highly likely if God exists. Belief is unlikely or abnormal if God doesn't exist. Therefore, in a world where people believe, it's more likely that God exists than not. When you put this into logical form, if God exists, then belief is likely. If God does not exist, belief is unlikely. People believe in God, therefore God is likely to exist. I'm not quite certain about the whole probability thing when it comes to logic, but I know just in a general sense that this is called affirming the consequent, which is a fallacy. It's invalid logic. And in the video, I thought it was funny because he said like, every night when I go to sleep since I became a Christian, I think about nothing but God, and I find that hard to believe given all the video responses he's done to women like Go Green 18 and the other girl that he did a video response to recently. I'm thinking that it's maybe not so much God that he's thinking about in his bed at night. So aside from his argument just being logically invalid, I don't even think it comes anywhere close to being a sound argument, in that the first two premises of his argument, that belief in God is highly likely if God exists, and belief in God is abnormal if God does not exist, I find those premises to be completely false, especially the second one. But it seems to me, I like getting a chance to glimpse into the mind of people who are devout into one belief, what they think in terms of other beliefs and how they regard other beliefs. Because, for example, he seems to assume that everyone believes in the sort of God that he does, which isn't true, or that this belief is widespread or has always been around. Just to go to the first premise, for example, he says, belief in God is highly likely if God exists. Well, this assumes all sorts of things about God, that if there was a God, that he would actually care or want people to know or believe in God, and that there are beings capable of believing in God and that sort of stuff. But the idea that if there was no God, then belief would be abnormal. Like, okay, even though not many people believe it now, lots of people believed that the sun was a god, the moon was a god. This is just putting human qualities to nature. When you actually sort of dissect what most human religious belief amounts to, it's not really all that hard to figure out why human beings could come to believe in God if there was no God. And people will say, well, I have a more sophisticated view of God. I don't believe that the sun is a god. Well, those simplistic views, the most rudimentary views on reality and God and nature and that sort of stuff, preceded all of these more sophisticated views once people sort of were forced to admit that, okay, maybe the sun is not actually a god, maybe it's just pulled by a god in a chariot, and maybe that's not true. Maybe just God put the sun in place, and God is something more and more abstract. There's no sense from VenomFangX that he actually understands the history of these ideas, and so he can just think, well, people believe in God. He just uses the term as if the majority of people agree with him or share his theology or his views, which is, factually speaking and historically speaking, far from the truth. And it always interests me in the way that people like him are just completely oblivious to the fact that there's radically different views out there from his. They have completely different value systems of the world. Of course, those sorts of things aren't going to matter in the same way. Like, aren't you afraid of hell? Well, don't you want salvation? These are all terms which, make sense within the vernacular of one religion, which don't make the same sense or don't make any sense at all in other religions. And it always amuses me to see how just completely oblivious religious people often are to what other people think and believe. The other video that I watched of his, What Are the Odds? It amused me also because he basically spends the entire video attacking something which I've never met anyone who actually believes. He confuses this idea of certain parts of the universe being chance or whatever he's getting at, wherever the hell he's getting this from, with people thinking that the universe came into existence because of possibility or probability. Sometimes I wonder, where do they even get these ideas from? But it's a perfect example of when they have a straw man to attack, and he's trying to show his intellectual prowess by dismantling this straw man with all this attempted, philosophical jargon and smartification thinking and all this stuff. But in one part, he talks about how self-causation is an absurd idea, and then a little bit later in the video, he says, well, so wouldn't some people say that God is self-caused, and how could God be self-caused? And his explanation for it essentially is that God is necessary, and God is necessary because it's in his nature to be necessary. But that is to say that God is self-caused. God would have a nature which would make him necessary, which would make him exist, which would make him have a nature, which would make him necessary, which would make him exist. Essentially, it is self-causation. I'm going to put this elaborate philosophical argument for God's non-existence that I made up in the description bar the other day. Of course, I don't think that this actually proves what it says. Well, it does, given the caveats that I list and that sort of thing. But it's funny that he actually, again, aside from attacking a straw man, seems to be clearly taking on philosophical arguments that he doesn't really understand, and then attempting to parrot them, just like whenever he parrots a William Lane Craig argument or another sort of philosophical apologetic argument, he never seems to get it right. That's what is so amusing, is that even when he's parroting an argument, he can't even get it right totally. So this is one of those examples where it seems to me like he doesn't actually understand the sort of metaphysics that he's talking about, because he's just like, well, if you're not determined, then if you're determined, then you're not probable, and if you're probable, and if you're determined, then you're necessary. It's like, well, no, actually, you're using the wrong phrase. He at one point says, like, God is determined or something like that. It's wrong use of a term. And to say self-causation is possible and then essentially to describe God as being self-caused, it's a lack of actually being able to get his head around these metaphysical concepts. But he's polishing his delivery style. I definitely recommend to anybody out there who has any of his videos archived on their computer to save those for the day which he makes an attempt at being a televangelist. because that definitely seems what he is going for. He is becoming more and more of a performer, trying to polish his videos. At one point, he was talking to somebody off camera who seemed to be coaching him and that sort of thing. He's at a university where, you know, they're all having their little Christian apologist clubs or whatever, and I think that is what he's trying to mold himself as, is some sort of internet evangelist or maybe even televangelist someday. So hang on to those videos where he's apologizing to the internets and generally making an ass of himself, because they're going to be useful later.